I would put something in my mouth and just weep with joy because it would just be like nothing else. And those food experiences, because I think food experiences are such a strong part of us, and they can be either great, they can be good, or they can be really, really bad. But I carry those with me forever.
This is The Crackling. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Fire. The dancing flame that flickers. The bursts of amber, red, yellow, and wisps of clean white. The crack, pop, and snap of wood as combustion takes hold. The warmth that wraps around you like a thick winter coat. Fire is incredibly powerful, mesmerizing even. It demands your attention. It draws upon your emotions. It changed the way we eat and set us on a new path of evolution. But for Lennox Hastie, he's not only drawn to the flame, he's willing to walk on it. Lennox, you've become the burning man, the man of fire. What's this last couple of years been like for you with Firedoor and sort of really changing perceptions on what it means to cook over fire?
For me, it's a never expanding journey. Like it's just, and the last few years has been a bit of a roller coaster. I mean, it's 5.5 years of ups and downs and lefts and rights, but it's always on the up and up, which is good. I mean, I'm learning more about cooking with fire, but also just running a business and leading a team. And it's just incredible to watch something that you create grow and flourish.
There's a lot of chefs that are cooking with wood fire ovens and cooking over fire and various things, but your approach is often misjudged or misunderstood. You've been lumped in with smoked meats and barbecue, all of those sort of things. But what you're doing is very much removed from that. Can you tell us where it starts, the cooking for you?
The stuff cooking for us, I mean, for myself, starts every morning when we light a fire in the restaurant, and we basically time all our preparations in harmony with that heat. We actually have to wait until the fire's hot enough to be able to cook, but obviously there's things you can do at an early stage, be it smoking a lot of the bases we use in the restaurant, but it's creating that life on a daily basis and watching it grow, and such a beautiful natural heat source to work with that it's very difficult to then go back to working with gas and electricity. Like you feel very differently about it, and you cook very differently. It's an instinctive form of cooking that you can't be replicated by the meats.
There's an argument to say that you're technically not cooking over fire in the sense that you're creating a fire on the side and then taking the embers to cook over. Can you tell us about that process and why it's so different?
Yeah, we use wood in the restaurant as opposed to we don't actually have any charcoal itself, but we're creating our own embers from that wood, and it's that ability to go back to that base product of viewing the wood as an ingredient in its own right, and choosing different woods, different Australian hardwoods, whether it be sort of the native ones, things like ironbark, or fruit wood, lighter fruit woods like apple and peach, and I could list like just literally like about 100 different types of woods. I mean, we use about any given time in the restaurant we have about 8 or 9 on site, and then we'll choose 4 or 5 woods on a given day, in accordance with what ingredients we're showcasing on the menu. The ones that we feel, and certainly a lot of it's very personal. Like it's essentially it's like my personal seasoning pot, I suppose. The ones that I feel best enhance the natural flavors of the ingredients. So, like it's not to overwhelm them. It's to find a point at which the ingredient marries with the wood, and finds this point at which both can really sing.
One thing that's really stood out is not only your focus on fire, but the starting point for you is the ingredient, not a recipe. Can you tell us how important that is to your form of cookery?
The Yeah, ingredients are everything, and it took me a long time, I think, as a chef to realize that. It was something that was I think it was I was more in touch with as a child, that sort of fascination with ingredients. But then becoming a chef, you sort of look, you're sort of learning different techniques over the years, and you look at the life of a chef and everything that it encompasses, and you kind of lose touch. I mean, I certainly did through my progression. I lost touch with the ingredients I love so much, and it wasn't until years later that I then found through cooking with fire actually brought me closer to the ingredients I love, and the realization that without those ingredients, I just didn't want to. I didn't want to cook. Like everything I do is for the beauty of the ingredients, and the most beautiful way I can see to showcase that is through cooking with fire, even though it's the most hardest form to cook. That's for sure.
Well, your career didn't start with cooking over fire. You're from the UK and you worked in some pretty incredible restaurants over there. Can you tell us those early stages, what it was like working in Le Gavroche and La Manoir? What was it like as a young chef in those restaurants?
I mean, it's a very different experience to what it is to what restaurants are now. I mean, I consider myself a bit of I suppose when you see that shift in any industry, you've experienced both sides of it, you consider yourself a little bit of a dinosaur, even though it wasn't that long ago. But the first kitchen that I went to when I was 15 was a one Michelin star, which was near where I lived, and that was just to get some work experience. That was my first foray into a kitchen. And I mean, luckily enough, there's lots of, because of that southeast of England, it's very much the Garden of England kind of feel about it, but it had lots of those old stately manor houses with amazing, would have a French chef in a kitchen. And just to be exposed to that at a very young age, I mean, it was such a game changer. It was just, I found a completely different world that was behind closed doors. There was no open kitchens in those days. Definitely, chefs were all about what goes on in the background. And I was really sort of, it's such a visceral world because there's lots of movement. It has its own sort of lifespan in terms of how a kitchen of those levels operate. It's very different to strikingly different to a domestic kitchen at home. You have brigades of chefs that are sort of drilled like the army, different levels, different hierarchy, and I was. I was pretty made aware that I was the lowest of the low. I was given all the donkey jobs in the kitchen available. So, but there was still things that I was impressed, and I took great pride in, from making stocks to plucking game to making jam, and taking sides of salmon down to the smokehouse to be smoked, because there was a smokehouse on site. It was that sort of traditional English style, but there was no. I mean, back then there was no. I mean, for us, barbecue in the UK represents sort of burning sausages in the garden in the summer. I mean, it's very different.
You learned your craft in some pretty special restaurants, but what you do now couldn't be further from that. Can you tell us where that sort of journey started, where you wanted something new, you wanted something different, and it led to that sort of allure of fire?
Yeah, I suppose because I mean, I always wanted to be a better chef, and I think most people do. Whatever they do, they want to sort of improve themselves, and so I kind of set in my mind a bit of a path, and you don't plan too far in advance. I mean, this is not. Back in those days, you kind of spend. It's not as much as I mean, stages weren't really a thing. You didn't really. It was more about how long you spent in a particular environment and the implications of that. So to move from London, I trained in London, at Westminster, because I wanted to have that. Having finished school, and I was quite adamant about finishing school, even though school didn't see any need for an education. Like, I was the only person in my class who was going into something that was non-academic like that, which wasn't something that was supported by my school. But I wanted to finish my education. I wanted to go to Westminster and get that really good base of theory and practical behind me, which then enabled me to go to places like the Gavroche, and go from the Gavroche and then move out to the country to places like the Manoir, which is an amazing, again, you think about sort of 4 years in London, to then spend 4 years at Le Manoir Quatre Saisons, when most people who go to Le Manoir only last 4 days. It's a big sort of test of strength. I mean, a lot of the times you question what the hell am I doing here, but you push on through, because it is such an immense training ground. Offers, has that old style kind of kitchen, and there's very few places can do it nowadays. There's probably only a handful in the world where they have, a dedicated butchery section where you're just breaking down whole animals, and a fish section, and a hot starter section, and a meat section, and a fish section. Like, it's all, and you can literally see it all, and experience and travel around it all. Nowadays it's much, with higher labor costs, and not much space in kitchens. It's all essentially, lots of sections kind of double up. So to be able to focus on that was a huge pull for me. And then to go, I suppose, because of, I mean, back in those days, if you're looking at any form of, quality and level of restaurant, the highest accolade for that was Michelin. And so I suppose, in some respects, not that I wasn't really, I don't suppose I was chasing stars, but it was just that kind of, you earning your spurs by moving up into the next league. And it is very much a bit of a league system, because you go from a 1 star to a 2 star, and there's a notable jump in the kitchen and the way it's run, and the style of food. And then to move from a 2 star to a 3 star when I went to France and worked with Marc Ferrer was, again, another step up. You're moving into a different league. So I always wanted to be in the Premier League. So, but then I suppose I got to the 3 Michelin star restaurants, and I found myself, it still wasn't enough. It wasn't giving me what I need. It actually took me further away from the ingredients that I love so much. And I found myself at a point, and this was, then moving to a 3 star in Spain, Martin Berasategui, where there was an over complication of food, there was an over handling of food, and what should have been the most important thing, being the ingredient, was then relegated down the line, and became sort of about the sixth most important thing on people's minds. The ingredients suffered as a result. And at that point, I thought, oh my God, like, what the hell am I going to do? Like, you get to that level, and you just find it's not what you wanted. It's not the promised land you're looking for. And you're just left bereft. I mean, I knew I didn't want to work there anymore. It literally ripped my heart and soul out um, to then have to think about, starting again.
You then went on a journey. I know you spent some time in Spain and San Sebastian, which really changed your life. Can you tell us about that period and the steps that led to that change?
Yeah, I mean, I love the region. I mean, the region is quite. If you've never been, the Basque country is so removed from the rest of Spain that I sort of grown up with as a child. Spain was always, being in the UK, was where you go for your summer holidays, and people go to the south, but the north is definitely where there's for me, the Basque country, which is actually, they're quite adamant to say this is not Spain, is strikingly different in its traditions and its food, and its pride. There's an overwhelming pride in its food at every single level, and the love of ingredients. It's just the most amazing seafood, meats, cheeses, cured meats. I mean, it's just incredible. And to sort of I wanted to be, I suppose I wanted to explore that world a bit further. I was quite happy being there, so I decided to stay a while in San Sebastian, in one of the Pinchos bars, which is called Estelena, and just started helping out there. And I loved that, because it was not a big kitchen by any means. It was a complete opposite, polar opposite of what I was working at in the 3 Michelin star restaurant. It wasn't six guys dressing a plate; it was just one guy. Um, and essentially, like, it was a couple of chefs and a kitchen hand. That was it, and just focusing on whatever ingredients you got to, whatever vegetables, whatever wild mushrooms coming from the mountains at the market every day, and whatever fish was coming from the boats. And there was a simple joy in that. That I was quite happy to. I appreciated the sea change for that brief period of time. There was a Even though I was working at a completely different level, it suddenly made me realign and reassess well, what is good food about? Is it about just the fine dining restaurants, or can you eat well at every single level? And that's the great thing I think I found in the Basque Country is you can do. You can eat the most amazing sort of pinchos at a bar in San Sebastian that's only going to cost you a couple of euros. It doesn't need all the bells and whistles, but it can be the most incredible food experience. And it was whilst working in that bar that I overheard a couple of patrons at the bar top talking about a restaurant in the Basque Country. So I don't know what you'd call it, serendipity or whatever, but something perked my interest about hearing about this chap who's in the mountains. Something quite romantic about that notion about, oh, there's this guy in the mountains, and he just grills things, and it's like, well, that sounds. And I was always, like most chefs are, you're always kind of looking for those sort of little outposts to maybe go and visit on your days off, those sort of small local restaurants. And for some reason, I don't know what it was. I mean, it just literally perked my interest. And the next day, I managed to get the day off and hired a car and drove out there. Got a little bit lost along the way because it is quite a difficult one to find. It's essentially an asador, which is located deep in the mountains in a small village between San Sebastian and Bilbao. And it's I kind of knew from the smell of wood smoke and entering the village that I'd somehow arrived.
What did you experience when you got there? What changed everything for you?
I mean, I think at that day I think I didn't realize there was a change at that stage. It was more I was looking for something, and I found this small restaurant, very unassuming, in a village where I met a man, and quite a big man. Victor's not small by any means. He's a good sizable guy, who was working in an asador on a grill section, in a galley style grill, um, largely by himself. There was a sort of a off the main kitchen. So there's a main kitchen with a couple of handful of local chefs. There's a French guy there, which helped me a bit because then I could speak French. I could not speak Spanish, and he was just grilling ingredients. And for some reason, I was this guy who he wasn't dressed like a chef. He just wore a white scrappy t-shirt and some sweatpants and some trainers. And I thought, Jesus, for some reason, I wanted to come and experience this. I didn't at that stage make any. When you're younger, you don't really. Sometimes you're quite spontaneous. It's spontaneous. You don't really make a plan to go, oh yeah, I'm gonna take a job here and I'm gonna spend the next 5 years here. It was more of those things. Like I just wanted to immerse myself in that experience, and so I asked for a job. My CV probably didn't help me the most because it was all Michelin based, and Victor had no desire to sort of no desire to chase Michelin stars. And I suppose, literally, I was quite insistent that I wanted to start work. Then he goes, "Okay, then you can start tomorrow," which was I don't know what I was expecting, but I then drove back to San Sebastian, had to leave obviously the Pinchos bar like that evening, and then I put my hire car back, I jumped on a train and started work the next day. I was late. I was late for my first day at work, which was amazing. That was not not because the train from San Sebastian kind of meanders really slowly through about 60 villages along the way, which wasn't the best. But I was literally thrown right into the fire on the grill my first day with Victor for a lunch service, and it was just more than anything. And even speaking about it now, it reminded me of my first day in the kitchen when I was 15. Like it suddenly like that little kid again, being awoken by seeing something completely different, which, having spent 15 15 odd years, 10 to 15 odd years in a kitchen, chefs are very unlikely to find something at that mature age that then they suddenly turns their head and they feel like a child again.
How did you feel about everything that you had learnt so far, did you have to unlearn things as a chef?
I suppose, yeah, I did. But it's interesting because I suppose that's what everything I learned. I mean, and the difficulty is you always, as some of your experiences in the places you learnt. I wouldn't. I would say it's probably easier to learn wood-fired cooking if you're not hunkered down by years of doing things a different way. But in the same instance, there was what I'd learned was a discipline. What I'd learned is a lot of hard work, and I think that resonated strongly with Victor, and also the way in which I could organize a kitchen. I'd learnt that. And the way in which I could. That I suppose a lot of the time, yeah, there were things I was wanting to. I was trying to absorb as much as possible. I mean, Victor wasn't. He's not like the most straightforward teacher. Essentially, he was like learning by observation. He didn't speak English, I didn't speak Spanish, but I was essentially learning by osmosis. But at the same time, when he wanted, or I could tell where he was struggling potentially to do something, I could find a way. It was this beautiful relationship where we came from very different backgrounds, and I completely trained as a chef. He never trained as a chef. So seeing those two worlds collide was something incredible. And I think that from the way in which I could formulate a lot of his ideas helped him as much as he helped me and opened my eyes to the beauty of wood fire cooking.
What sort of dishes do you remember from that time? I know it wasn't recipe based and it was based on ingredients, but were there things that changed your perception on how to cook specific ingredients?
Yeah, completely. I mean, oh God, I mean, how many different levels do you look at? There was just this flurry of the most incredible ingredients that would come in the door, which was, you know, amazing considering how remotely we're located. But essentially, we're ideally located because we're in the mountains, so it's at the land, and we're not far from the coast. We've got the sea, and then we had a vegetable garden. And I'd worked in restaurants like the Manoir that have their own vegetable gardens, but to be able to grow enough vegetables to sustain a restaurant is quite difficult. We had we're fortunate enough we had a vegetable garden the size of a football pitch, which is quite striking. It was run by Victor's father, who's sadly now passed away. But it was that kind of that Basque style of being very self-sufficient. They're not requiring necessarily a lot from the outside world, apart from just working with nature and the ingredients thrown at you. But I mean, the difficulty of Echebarri is it's set for me such a high bar in terms of personal bests for ingredients and for eating. You look across the board from fish and shellfish from the coast there, going, from all around Spain, not obviously not just locally on our coast where you get things like pasuga and monkfish, but across the Galicia, incredible turbot, like the most incredible turbot from the Atlantic that would range from the smallest would be about 3 kilos to 7 kilos in size that we were cooking whole on a grill. You know, that's so far removed from, I think, previously seeing something like what I thought was a good sized turbot at sort of 3-4 kilos and breaking it down into pieces and beautiful sections and just cooking that small section. And I distinctly remember grilling turbot at La Manoir, which is a dish that I always loved with aromatic oil, but they would grill it on a gas barbecue, and there would the height basically the requisite for grilling was to grill it perfectly at 90-degree angles. That was the benchmark for grilling. So to then reversal that and cook an entire fish whole on the bone and grill it over a live fire with fruit embers, and to see the way in which it just completely changed everything for me. I mean, to cook whole fish like that, and to cook like the way the pockets of gelatin run along the spine, the way in which the skin caramelizes like pork crackling, it's just absolutely outrageous. Like like literally you just weep. And I remember I had so many instances of this Echebarri where I would put something in my mouth and just weep with joy because it would just be like nothing else. And those food experiences, because I think food experiences are such a strong strong part of us, and they can be either great, they can be good, or they can be really, really bad. But I carry those with me forever. In terms of, like, I remember how I felt when I sucked on a head of a prawn from the east coast of Spain at Palamos, and that's just looking at things like seafood, live baby shrimp, the eel, ingredients I'd never seen before, like the eels, the baby eels, which are essentially like the most expensive fish spaghetti you ever have in your life, is like €100 for a bowl. But even just something like that, where you're essentially doing the exact opposite. You're not eating big fish; you're eating baby fish. To pulpitos, like baby octopus, would be the size of your fingernail. I mean, it's just mind blowing in terms of the level and the quality of the ingredients. And that, I mean, that's just the seafood. Then you look at things like the meat. It just ticks so many boxes across. Normally you go to one place and you think, oh, this place is really good for this. This place is really good for seafood, or this place is really good for meat, or this does really good vegetables. Etchebarri, like the Basque Country, had everything, and everything was showcased on the grill, and that was outrageous and outstanding. To have freshly picked vegetables, peas picked from the garden, and then just kissed over the grill is mind blowing. It's just like that's all it needed. You didn't have to cook it three different ways.
Your time in the Michelin star restaurants, I know you were butchering whole animals, and in fact, there was even an article written about you butchering a whole pig back in those days when you were a, a young chef. What was it like then, cooking over fire and butchering? Were you butchering whole pigs and trying to work out what to do with that?
Yeah, we sort of there was a lot less. There was definitely less butchery, I think, at Etchebarri than there was. I mean, obviously, in terms of size of animal, it's obviously hard to gauge. A lot of the pigs, like, I mean, we had such a dedicated butchery section at places like the Manoir that you would break down a lot of suckling pigs, and I suppose showcase them in different lights. You'd do something different with the belly and something different with the rack, and you'd put the legs on the rotisserie. Um, that area, you wouldn't see so much suckling pig. You would see much larger animals, because the majority of the pig that was used was then used for things like charcuterie, and things, when charcuterie in Basque terms is obviously the famous chorizo, which was its own thing. It was an event. It wasn't just like, oh, this, we're getting a couple of pigs in next month. It was a period of the year, and it only happens in the cooler months, um, because of when they slaughter basically the slaughter coincides with when you can hang the charcuterie outside, the pigs outside freely in the cold, the dry cold in the mountains, and you can hang the charcuterie up there. And it was this, the fact that we would take pigs both locally, actually from, I strongly remember actually from Victor's brother, who I used to live with in a ruin, the old ruins of the family house, like this really broken down house, was killing a pig one day right outside the front of the house. And they would like collect the blood, and then with the blood we made a morcilla, essentially, which is the Basque or Spanish black pudding. And it's that use of all that, like, that same sort of process of that, using all the ingredients using all the parts of the animal, and deciding, okay, well, the blood makes a sausage, and then these hams get cured or made up and ground into to make the chorizo, which was its own labor of love, because essentially every year would make, every week would have basically a period of 6 to 7 weeks, 7 weeks at the most, because then it started to get too warm, where it'd basically make every week on our one day off, we'd make 300 kilos of chorizo, which was insane, But it was so beautiful, because we'd obviously take the really fatty, rich pork, add literally just salt, garlic juice, and instead of powdered pimenton choricillo, which is a certain type of pepper that only grows in that area, and it's got a flavor like no other. But instead of taking the powder, we would actually grow the peppers ourselves, dry the peppers up at the house, and then rehydrate the peppers and scrape the puree off the skins and put that puree into the mix, which is what made the most amazing, like hands down, like Victor's Chorizo and Chistora is the most amazing thing, one of the most amazing pork products you're going to ever put in your mouth. But that's how simple it is. It's just, yeah.
I know it's many years later, but Firedoor, can you tell us about how that happened? And it's a restaurant that has no gas, no electricity. You've got 2 wood fire ovens and grills. I remember the first time I ate there, I realized immediately it was something that we hadn't experienced before in Australia. And um, tell us about how that started and what it actually is, what you're doing at Firedoor.
It's it's definitely a labour of love. I mean, some people call it a love letter to the Basque Country, which I suppose in a way it is. I wanted to, having spent 5 years at Etchebarri, I continued, like, I didn't suddenly want to change my mind and find a different form of cooking. Like, there's nothing has touched the sides in terms of cooking with fire and how that affects me, how I cook, and the flavor of those ingredients. So I wanted to continue that journey of, thinking, well, the Basque tradition is one amazing culture, one amazing tradition, but how many other cultures, how many other traditions are there out there in the world? And finding a place like diverse enough, like Australia, where there's the potential to, I think, showcase a lot of different cuisines through cooking with fire, and exploring the ingredients that we have in Australia, many of which, having grown up in Europe, I'd never cooked with before, but also the woods. I mean, going back to that base idea of looking for wood to see if something was possible here, because without the wood, without the ingredients, I knew that I couldn't open a restaurant. I needed those base foundations had to be in place, and they had to be solid ones. And the Australian native wood, like the ironbark, for instance, burns 400 degrees hotter than the oak we're using in Spain. Which was quite a learning curve for me. It was a huge learning curve. My first oven broke under the stress of the heat, and so we had to find another way and means of obviously being able to do this. And even though it took me 4 years, it was a painful 4 years to obviously open a restaurant with the Finks. It's I think that time was necessary to make all those trials and errors and to form, more importantly, form those relationships with the producers we now we've worked with from the beginning. Some we continue to work with. Obviously, we continue to find new amazing farmers and producers out there, and different types of woods that we cook over, and that's the way in which we kind of evolved the kitchen and the style of cooking itself.
We've talked about fire and history and culture and how important it is to so many cultures on the planet. What's so special about cooking on fire for you? Can you take us to the moment when you're in front of the embers and cooking? Like what is the process?
It's beautifully simple. I mean, essentially, you're literally just you're lighting a fire every single day, and you're working kind of backwards from there, and you are exposing, you're essentially creating the most amazing embers. You're finding a point at which the wood is, you're choosing. I mean, and I think that's the interesting sort of insight, is the fact that you're making the calls. You're part of the process. You're an ingredient in your own right. Like, everyone grills differently, and you're essentially, not only choosing your ingredients, but you are an ingredient, because then you're highlighting, you're putting your own um, fingerprint on the actual process itself. You're choosing which embers you're using at any given time. You're choosing at what stage you choose those embers, how many, the proximity of the ingredient to the embers itself, and that has an undoubted effect on the finished result. It's amazing to see something so. It's an interesting process when you're, like, up close and personal with it. I mean, again, the kitchen is hotter than I'd ever imagined, um, just by the sheer desire a driven desire when I saw the opportunity to only cook with fire, to basically not cook with gas or electricity. I chose that harder path because I wanted to see if it was possible, and I wanted to really push my limits. But as a result, the kitchen is obviously um, a very hot space to work in, and it can be daunting sometimes because essentially the style of cooking that we do, even though a lot of barbecue is traditionally sort of low and slow, is essentially it's a live fire kitchen. It's essentially there's nowhere to hide. It's an open plan. There's it's an immediate form of cooking where essentially we're cutting meat and fish to order, we're killing shellfish to order, and we're grilling to order. Just really trying to find this really fine point where an ingredient just is at its optimum. And it's a difficult line to kind of it's like this daily challenge. And even now, even 5.5 years later of running this restaurant, every single service I feel this challenge. It's the most beautiful thing, but at the same time, it's when you get it right, it's the most incredible feeling. But at the same time, running you're running on this really high adrenaline level. Sometimes you can be faced with this. Obviously, the waiting customers, the expectation is there, but obviously you're almost in your zen-like zone because you're faced with this wall-like fire and you're trying not to panic. Because obviously that's the thing that a lot of people do. You're essentially riding this edge of danger when you're cooking with fire. And sometimes, I mean, even the other night, I was, throwing 3 steaks for one table on the grill, and um, yeah, the steaks had a high level of marbling. Suddenly the flames crept up, and the flames got almost licking the top of my head at one stage. And it's those in those states when you feel like you're really in the fire, and it's very daunting. It's a very daunting way to cook, but there's nothing. I suppose after years, I kind of accept it to a certain degree, but at the same time, I still get like the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Like literally, I'm suddenly awakened and alert. Like you really have to be on your game when it comes to grilling in that style. It's such a difficult thing to describe.
You mentioned that about the right moment to cook, and to you previously, you've talked about stages of fire, a couple of different stages, and when the best time to cook different ingredients are. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the misconceptions is people sort of tend to cook a lot over flame. I find because they don't necessarily. For some people, they believe that flame's the hottest part of and the most flavoursome part of an actual a fire itself. When the reverse is true, like the ember stage is the cleanest, the most flavoursome, and the highest heat potential. So it's exercising. Cooking with fire is all about exercising patience. You're essentially in a situation where you're forced to slow down and appreciate the ingredients around you and be part of the process. And you have to wait for the fire to be ready. You have to wait for it to burn down to embers to then allow the ingredients to really come forward.
You mentioned the challenges of finding the perfect ingredients, and I know you spent many years looking at Australian ingredients to find those, and you had a real tough time finding the sort of pork that you wanted, but you managed to find that. Can you tell us about that experience and what good pork means to you and how to cook it?
Crikey, yeah, it's very difficult, and I think because of Spain, obviously set so many benchmarks, and you're coming from a culture which obviously has, things like jamon, um, and that's sort of that depth of flavor, that handling of the meat, that sort of those incredible landscapes, where you have pigs doing what they do best, which is rooting. It's sort of which I know has a different connotation in Australia, but essentially, being allowed to sort of roam free and feast on acorns, berries, roots, wild mushrooms, and things like that, and that the richness they get from that experience being allowed to just be what they are. And naturally, there's a natural way in which I think animals should be raised, and when they are raised naturally, I think it really resounds in that eating quality. I mean, just the way in which the pork tastes very different, like that Iberian pork that tastes, because of that amazing climate and that amazing diet, um, just tastes magical. So I think it's really difficult. And it was the same with the beef coming to Australia and trying to find, obviously we don't have exactly that kind of breed, like much like our beef, we have a lot of the old English breeds of pork. The sort of heritage breeds, the Berkshires, but then trying to find, farmers who really understand, because obviously there's a difficulty in Australia largely, I find, with, the word free range and how free range it actually is, and just trying to know your producer as much as possible, and to know how they farm. And most of the guys, pretty much most of the guys we work with are all, they're super passionate about what they do. They're all regenerative farmers, and they really care for their livestock, which is a beautiful thing. And particularly some of the pork producers we work with now, who are fairly incredible. We currently get pork from both Frank at Toluca Park, who's very close to the city. Luke Winder at Marima, who's got again really interesting mix, because he's got the Tokyo X, which again is a bit of a crossbreed of a Duroc Berkshire and a Beijing Black, but again farming really small amounts. And the reason we sort of work with a couple of different producers is to make sure we have enough pork, have enough for the restaurant, because these guys don't farm intensively. They're not farming huge numbers. It's just the odd couple of pigs that we can get. And I think probably my favorite of the producers is one called Extraordinary. The farm's actually called Extraordinary, and for me, the pork just is absolutely extraordinary as well. It's literally 30 minutes in Dubbo. Michael Hicks and his wife Alexandra, they've literally got 140 hectares where they just rotate the pigs on a rotating pasture. And I think that they really took it next level when they decided they went through all the goalposts to basically be able to have their own mobile abattoir and kill their own pigs on site. Which I think is going to be and I hope it's going to become more of a common thing in Australia, because a lot of the time we have the most amazing ingredients, and they suffer at someone else's hands. We have a lot of difficulties, and I find this repeatedly in certain abattoirs, because it takes a certain type of person to work in an abattoir, and it'd be a bloody horrible job. And to be able to make those cuts of precision, a lot of the times the animals have to travel a long way to abattoirs, because Australia is such a big bloody country. But by obviously killing on site, the animals don't have to travel 2.5 hours, and they just have control over their entire production cycle from birth to death. And it just resonates so much with that sort of those places in Spain that would do that as well. And you can really taste the difference when you eat the pork.
Now that you found these ingredients, what's some of the best ways that you like cooking them, and what do you match with them?
So from the guys at Extraordinary, we tend to take the saddles, the barrels essentially, of the pork. There's again, because they have small amounts of these pigs. There's a group of chefs. I mean, a lot of the Extraordinary stuff we get through Feather and Bone, and it's there's lots of demand for really high quality sausages and things like that. But we'll take the saddles. We age all our meat, so it's not just the beef we age. We age our lamb. We age our chickens. We age our pork as well. Just because in terms of that dry heat on the fire, it's great that you start with a really dry skin when it comes to things like pork, but also because you just want to intensify the flavors. So we age on the bone for about 3 weeks in our dry age fridge, and it just makes such a huge difference And I think if I run the juxtaposition between, I think what I was doing previously in a lot of the French restaurants where you have like really high temperature fat, in terms of like sealing off a piece of pork, and obviously the crackling all bubbles up and goes really crispy, to how incredible the wood fire can be, because essentially we just leave it to dry for 3 weeks. We'll just cut as a whole piece of barrel. We'll basically cook it as a whole piece. Try and keep it as integral as possible on the bone, because you get this beautiful sweetness developed when you cook anything on the bone. We'll score the fat lightly and then literally burn down some fruit embers. I really like sort of peach, nectarine, and wine barrels for pork for some reason. It just has this beautiful sweet perfume that really marries well with the sort of really sweet and nutty pork. And then the heat from that travels up. It's always really interesting to see when you sort of pull embers out the fire. They don't look particularly hot, but they're actually burning between 800 to 900 degrees Celsius. And it's far hotter. That radiant heat that you get from a fire is far hotter than obviously what you'd get in a pan cooking with oil. So it's just amazing to watch the way in which the skin just crackles, and it was super crunchy and glassy, and it has all the flavor behind it of the wood.
Wow. Well, Lennox, you've changed the conversation of cooking over fire in Australia and globally. You've become almost a household name among chefs and the restaurant fraternity with what you're doing. It's extraordinary. We've loved having you on the Crackling. Keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Huck.
This is The Crackling, a Deep in the Weeds production in partnership with PorkStar. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we catch up with some of Australia's best chefs and pork producers to discover what makes Australian pork so special.